I'm sitting at my kitchen table right now, holding something that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. It's smaller than a fingernail, this tiny memory chip, but it contains a secret that my husband Bobby carried for 3 years until his heart attack 6 months ago. The broken watch lies open beside me like a patient on an operating table, its silver back panel removed, tiny gears scattered across the wood surface. For 43 years of marriage, Bobby wore this Seiko every single day. The hands were frozen at 317, had been since the day he bought it used from a pawn shop in 1981. When people asked why he didn't just fix it or buy a new one, he'd smile that charming smile and say, "Some things are perfect just the way they are, broken or not." I believed he was talking about us, about our marriage, about how love doesn't always look perfect from the outside, but it works anyway. God, I was such a fool. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Chen, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I was living a love story. Bobby and I met when I was 19 and he was 21. He was this confident electrician with calloused hands and a laugh that could fill a room. I was a shy education major who'd never been on a real date. "You're gonna marry me someday, Maggie Sullivan," he told me on our third date, spinning me around in the parking lot of Tony's Diner. "I can just feel it." And I did marry him, gave up my maiden name, gave up my teaching dreams when his electrical business needed managing, gave up pieces of myself, so gradually I didn't even notice they were missing. We built what everyone saw as the perfect partnership. Bobby was the face of the business, charming clients and solving their problems. I was behind the scenes, handling paperwork, scheduling, making sure the bills got paid, and the house felt like home. We had our daughter Emma, raised her to be strong and independent, celebrated 30 years, then 40 years together. At neighborhood barbecues, younger couples would ask us for marriage advice. "What's your secret?" they'd say, watching Bobby wrap his arm around my waist. Bobby would tap that broken watch and wink. Time doesn't matter when you're with the right person. Everyone would laugh and nod, thinking we were relationship goals. Even I believed it, especially when he'd kiss my forehead every morning and say, "Another day with my best girl." But that memory chip changes everything, because 3 months before Bobby's heart attack, he sat in his truck outside our house and made a video. Not for me, not for Emma. For a woman named Sarah Mitchell, someone I'd never heard of until today. In that video, my husband of 4 decades looks directly into the camera and says the words that are still echoing in my head. "Sarah, I know I've been saying I'll leave Maggie for 2 years now. I recorded this because I need you to know I'm finally ready." He was planning to leave me. After 43 years, he was planning to walk away for another woman, and he'd been promising her he would for 2 entire years, while kissing my forehead every morning like nothing had changed. The man I buried, the man I mourned, the man whose broken watch I finally decided to fix as some kind of tribute to our love story. He was living a lie so deep, it took his death to uncover it. Looking back now, I can see how carefully Bobby constructed our life to hide his deception. But at the time, everything felt so solid, so real. We had rhythms that seemed unbreakable, traditions that felt sacred. Every morning for the past 15 years, since Bobby retired, we'd sit at this same kitchen table with our coffee. He'd read me interesting bits from the newspaper while I planned our day. "Listen to this, Maggie," he'd say, folding back the sports section. "The high school baseball team made it to regionals. Remember when Emma played softball there?" And I'd smile, loving how he connected everything back to our family, our memories. He'd always finish his coffee first, kiss my forehead, and say those words, "Another day with my best girl." Then he'd check his phone for weather or news, he said, before heading out to his workshop in the garage. I never questioned why he always angled the phone away from me during those morning checks. I trusted him completely. Our evenings were just as predictable. Bobby would come in from whatever project he was working on, wash his hands at the kitchen sink while telling me about his day. "Fixed Mrs. Henderson's porch light today," he'd say, or helped Jim install that ceiling fan he's been putting off. Always helping someone, always needed somewhere. It made me proud to be married to such a generous man. We'd eat dinner together, watch the news, then take our evening walk around the neighborhood. Bobby knew everyone, would stop to chat with Mr. Rodriguez about his tomatoes, ask the Johnsons about their new grandbaby. People loved him. "You're so lucky, Maggie," our neighbor Carol would say. "Bobby's one of the good ones." And I felt lucky. Genuinely, deeply lucky. Sundays were for family dinner with Emma. She'd come over with whatever boyfriend she was dating at the time, and Bobby would grill while I made sides. "Dad, you're embarrassing me," Emma would laugh, as Bobby interrogated her latest partner about his intentions and job prospects. "That's my job, sweetheart," Bobby would say, flipping burgers. "Gotta make sure nobody's good enough for my girls." My girls. He'd include me in that possessive protection, and it made me feel cherished. Emma would roll her eyes, but I could tell she loved it too. After dinner, Bobby and I would sit on the porch swing he'd built for our 25th anniversary, watching Emma play with whatever dog was visiting from the neighbors. "We did good, didn't we, Maggie?" he'd say, his arm around my shoulders. "Look at her. Look at what we built." I'd lean into him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, hearing the steady tick of that broken watch against my ear. We did perfect, Bobby. But even then, there were tiny moments that should have made me wonder, like how he'd suddenly go quiet when his phone buzzed during our walks, or how he started taking longer in the shower, emerging with damp hair and a secretive smile. When I'd ask what made him so happy, he'd just say, "Can a man be happy with his life?" I interpreted everything through the lens of love. His new cologne meant he was taking care of himself for me. His sudden interest in weekend trips meant he wanted more adventures for us. When he started working late again after years of retirement, I was proud that people still needed his skills. "You're working too hard," I'd tell him when he'd come home at 8 or 9 in the evening. "Just want to make sure we're set for the future, sweetheart. Want to take care of my best girl." Best girl. Those words used to make me feel special, chosen. Now I realize they were just easier than saying my name. It started 3 years before Bobby died, on a Tuesday evening in October. I remember because the leaves were just starting to turn, and I was making his favorite pot roast for dinner. Bobby was sitting in his recliner, scrolling through his phone with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the casual browsing face he wore when checking weather or news. This was different, intent, almost tender. He was smiling at the screen in a way that made something twist in my stomach. "What's so interesting over there?" I called from the kitchen, trying to keep my voice light. Bobby's head snapped up like he'd forgotten I was there. The phone disappeared into his lap so quickly, I almost thought I'd imagined the whole thing. "Oh, just some article about that new restaurant downtown. Thinking maybe we should try it sometime." But his face was flushed, and he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Bobby, who used to leave his phone charging on the kitchen counter overnight, started taking it everywhere. To the bathroom, to the garage, even to bed, tucked under his pillow like a teenager hiding something from parents. When I'd walk into a room, he'd quickly flip the phone face down or slide it into his pocket. If I asked what he was looking at, he'd give me vague answers. "Just checking the scores," or "reading about that storm coming through." But I knew Bobby's face when he was actually reading about weather or sports. This wasn't that face. The worst part was how he'd started positioning himself differently when using the phone, angling his body away from me, turning slightly in his chair so I couldn't see the screen. It was subtle enough that I could tell myself I was imagining it, but deliberate enough that I knew I wasn't. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in November. Bobby was in the shower, and his phone was buzzing on the nightstand. It had been going off intermittently all evening, and each buzz made him tense up a little more. I wasn't trying to snoop, I really wasn't, but the screen lit up with a text preview as I was walking past to get my book from the dresser. "Miss talking to you? Same time tomorrow?" My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The message was from someone named Sarah, with a little red heart emoji next to her name. Not Sarah Chen or Cousin Sarah or anything that would indicate family. Just Sarah, with a heart. When Bobby came out of the bathroom toweling off his hair, I was sitting on the edge of our bed holding his phone. "Bobby, who's Sarah?" For just a second his whole body went rigid. Then he laughed, but it sounded forced. "Sarah? Oh, that's David's new girlfriend. You know how he is with women after the divorce. Always needing advice about dating at his age." He took the phone from my hands, his fingers briefly covering mine. "Why, what did she say?" "Something about missing talking to you and meeting tomorrow." Bobby's laugh got easier, more natural. "Oh, that. David asked me to help him plan something special for her. You know how hopeless he is with romance. Wants to surprise her with dinner at that place she likes." It made sense. David, Bobby's older brother, had been divorced for 5 years and was famously awkward with women. Bobby had always been the charmer in the family, the one who knew how to make women feel special. Of course, David would ask for advice, but David lived in Arizona. They talked maybe once a month. "I thought David was in Phoenix," I said carefully. "He is, but Sarah lives here. That's the whole problem. Long-distance relationship. He's flying in tomorrow to surprise her. Asked me to scope out restaurants, make sure everything's perfect." Bobby sat beside me on the bed, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Maggie, sweetheart, you're not worried about something, are you?" I wanted to push harder, ask more questions, but Bobby's arm felt so warm and familiar around me, and the explanation, while complex, wasn't impossible. Maybe I really was being paranoid. "No," I said, leaning into him. "I just worry when things seem different." "Nothing's different, love. Just helping out family." But as he kissed the top of my head, I could feel his phone buzzing again in his other hand. After that night with the text message, Bobby's absences became more frequent and more elaborate. Helping David with Sarah turned into weekly commitments, then twice weekly, then weekend trips to scout locations for David's romantic gestures. "Phoenix must be closer than I thought," I said one Friday morning as Bobby packed an overnight bag for the 3rd weekend in a month. "What do you mean?" Bobby asked, not looking up from folding his shirts. "Well, David seems to need a lot of in-person help with this relationship." Bobby's hands paused for just a moment. "It's complicated, Maggie. Long-distance relationships are hard. He's really struggling with it." But when I suggested calling David to invite them both for dinner when he was in town, Bobby quickly shut it down. "Oh, they're keeping it low-key right now. Don't want to pressure them by making it too family-oriented too soon." I started feeling like I was speaking a foreign language in my own home. Bobby would nod and smile when I talked, but his eyes would drift to his phone or the clock or anywhere but my face. Conversations that used to flow naturally became stilted, full of gaps where he seemed to be thinking about something else entirely. Our morning coffee ritual changed too. Bobby started rushing through breakfast, checking that broken watch obsessively, even though it never moved from 3:17. "Running late today, sweetheart," he'd say, kissing my forehead quickly and heading out before 8 instead of our usual leisurely hour together. "Late for what?" I'd ask. "You're retired." Promised Jim I'd help him with his deck early. Want to beat the heat. But Jim's deck had been finished for months. The most painful part was how Bobby started treating my presence like an interruption. I'd bring him lemonade while he worked in the garage, and instead of the grateful smile I was used to, he'd look almost annoyed. "Thanks, but you don't need to check on me so much, Maggie. I'm fine out here." When I'd suggest activities we used to enjoy together, antiquing, visiting the farmer's market, driving to the lake, Bobby would sigh like I was being needy. "Maybe next weekend, honey. I've got a lot on my plate right now." But his plate seemed to involve a lot of staring at his phone and taking mysterious calls that he'd walk outside to answer. Emma noticed during one of our Sunday dinners, Bobby had excused himself 3 times to take calls, each time stepping onto the back deck and speaking in hushed tones. "Dad's been weird lately," Emma said as we cleared dishes. "He seems distracted, like he's here but not really here, you know?" I found myself defending him automatically. "He's just busy, sweetheart. You know how people are always calling him for help with projects." "But he's been retired for 15 years, Mom, and he never used to take calls during family dinner." She was right. But admitting that felt like admitting something was fundamentally wrong with my marriage. "People depend on him," I said weakly. "He doesn't like to let them down." What I didn't say was that he seemed perfectly comfortable letting me down lately. The worst moment came during what should have been a romantic evening. I'd made reservations at Romano's, the Italian place, where we'd had our first anniversary dinner 42 years earlier. I wore the blue dress Bobby always said brought out my eyes, put on the perfume he'd bought me for Christmas. Throughout dinner, Bobby's phone buzzed constantly in his jacket pocket. Each buzz made him tense, made his eyes dart away from mine. "Bobby, can you please turn that off, just for tonight?" He looked at me like I'd asked him to cut off his arm. "I can't, Maggie. What if it's an emergency?" "What kind of emergency? Emma's fine. David can handle himself for 2 hours." "It's not just them. People count on me." But the people who counted on him apparently didn't include his wife of 43 years, sitting across from him in a dress she'd worn hoping to feel beautiful, asking for just one evening of his undivided attention. He never did turn off the phone, and I never felt more invisible than I did that night, sitting in a crowded restaurant, completely alone. The humiliation came at Carol Martinez's annual summer barbecue, an event I'd been looking forward to for weeks. Carol lived 3 houses down and threw the same party every July. Neighbors, friends, plenty of food, and enough wine to make everyone feel like family. Bobby and I had been going for 12 years straight. It was one of those traditions that made our neighborhood feel like a real community. I spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing a yellow sundress that Bobby used to say made me look like sunshine. I made my famous potato salad, the one that always got requests for the recipe. I was excited to spend an evening with Bobby somewhere other than our increasingly tense home, maybe recapture some of the easy companionship we used to share. But from the moment we arrived, Bobby was different. Distracted. His phone was already in his hand before we'd even said hello to Carol. "Bobby Chen," Carol hugged him warmly. "How's retirement treating you, handsome?" "Oh, you know how it is," Bobby said, but his eyes were on his screen. "Always something keeping me busy." I watched him scroll through messages while Carol and I talked about her new grandbaby. Every few minutes, his face would light up with that smile, the one I'd seen more and more often lately, but never when he was looking at me. "Bobby, honey, put that thing away," I said gently, touching his arm. "We're at a party." He looked at me with genuine irritation. "Maggie, I'm expecting some important calls tonight. Can you just give me a minute?" 20 minutes later, he was still glued to that phone. I found myself making excuses to our neighbors. "Oh, you know Bobby, always helping someone with something." But the excuses felt hollow, especially when I caught him actually smiling and typing responses while I was mid-sentence with the Hendersons about their kitchen renovation. The breaking point came when I was talking to Janet Ross, our next-door neighbor for 8 years. We were discussing the book club she'd invited me to join when Bobby's phone rang. Without even excusing himself, he walked away from our conversation to answer it. "Hey there," I heard him say in a voice that was warm and intimate. "I was hoping you'd call." Janet's expression shifted, and she glanced between Bobby and me with obvious discomfort. "Maggie, is everything okay with you two?" "Of course," I said quickly. "Why would you ask that?" She hesitated, clearly debating whether to say something. "It's just, well, Bobby's been on that phone all evening, and the way he answered just now—" She trailed off, looking genuinely concerned. That's when I heard laughter from the deck behind us. Tom Williams, who used to work with Bobby at the electrical supply company, was talking to a group of men near the grill. "Poor Maggie," Tom was saying, loud enough that his voice carried across the yard. "She has no idea Bobby's been texting someone constantly for months. We see him at the hardware store grinning at his phone like a lovesick teenager. Never seen a married man so obvious about stepping out." Another man chuckled. "My wife would have thrown that phone in the garbage disposal by now." "Maggie's too trusting," Tom replied. "Always has been. Sweet woman, but completely clueless." The blood drained from my face. Janet reached out and touched my arm, but I couldn't feel anything except the burning humiliation spreading through my chest. These men, Bobby's friends, people I'd known for years, were talking about my marriage like it was neighborhood gossip. and they all knew something I'd been desperately trying not to see. I excused myself and walked toward the house, needing a moment to collect myself. But as I passed the group on the deck, Tom saw me and his face went white. "Oh, Maggie, I didn't see you there," he stammered. "Obviously," I said quietly. The other men suddenly found their beer bottles fascinating. Tom opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, maybe apologize or explain. But what was there to explain? They'd all watched my husband carry on with someone else while I stood by like a fool. When I came out of Carol's bathroom 10 minutes later, Bobby was finally off the phone. He found me sitting alone on the porch swing. "There you are," he said cheerfully. "Ready to head home? I'm getting tired." I looked at my husband of 43 years, this man who'd just spent an entire evening ignoring me in front of our friends and neighbors, and felt something crack inside my chest. "Bobby, do you even see me anymore?" He blinked, surprised by the question. "What do you mean? Of course I see you." "When? When do you see me? Because I've been standing next to you all evening, and you haven't looked at me once." "Maggie, you're being dramatic. I've had some important calls tonight." Important calls. More important than his wife's dignity. More important than the respect of our neighbors. More important than the marriage that everyone else could see was falling apart. I stood up from the swing, smoothing down my yellow sundress that no longer made me feel like sunshine. "Let's go home, Bobby." But as we walked the 3 blocks back to our house, I realized I wasn't sure what home meant anymore. The shift happened gradually after that horrible night at Carol's barbecue. I stopped asking Bobby about his calls, stopped questioning his weekend trips, stopped trying to engage him in conversations that he clearly didn't want to have. It wasn't a conscious decision at first. I just found myself pulling back, like a flower closing its petals when the sun disappears. Why keep reaching for warmth that wasn't there? Our morning coffee ritual became a silent affair. Bobby would read his paper, check his phone, and I'd drink my coffee while looking out the window at Mrs. Henderson's garden. When he'd get up to leave, that perfunctory kiss on my forehead felt more like a habit than affection. "Another day with my best girl," he'd still say. But the words sounded hollow now, like lines from a play he'd grown tired of performing. "Have a good day, Bobby," I'd reply, not bothering to ask where he was going or when he'd be back. I'd learned those questions only irritated him. The evening walk stopped entirely. Bobby claimed his knee was bothering him, but I'd see him moving just fine when he thought I wasn't watching. Really, I think he just couldn't stand the forced intimacy of walking beside me when his mind was clearly elsewhere. I started eating dinner alone most nights. Bobby would come in from the garage or return from wherever he'd been, grab a plate, and eat standing at the counter while scrolling his phone. "Aren't you going to sit down?" I asked one evening in September. "Just catching up on some things," he said, not looking up. "Don't wait for me." So I stopped waiting. I'd make enough food for 2 out of habit, but I'd eat by myself at the kitchen table, reading library books or working on crossword puzzles. The silence was actually preferable to the tension that filled the air when we tried to pretend everything was normal. Emma noticed during one of our Sunday dinners that had become increasingly strained. "You guys are weird lately," she said bluntly, looking between Bobby and me as we sat at opposite ends of the table like strangers. "Are you fighting about something?" "We're fine, sweetheart," Bobby said automatically. "No, you're not fine. Mom barely talks anymore. And Dad, you've checked your phone 6 times since we sat down. What's going on?" I saw Bobby's jaw tighten. "Emma, we're adults. We don't need to entertain each other every second." "Entertain each other? Dad, you're married. You're supposed to actually like spending time together." After Emma left that night, Bobby turned on me like it was my fault she'd noticed the cracks in our facade. "Did you say something to her about us?" "About what, Bobby? What would I say?" "Don't play dumb, Maggie. You've been acting strange for months. Cold, distant." The irony of him calling me distant was almost laughable. "I've been acting the way you seem to want me to act." What's that supposed to mean? It means I stopped trying to compete with your phone for attention. Bobby's face flushed red. "You're being ridiculous. I'm not competing with anyone." "No, you're right. There's no competition. Your phone wins every time." That night, Bobby slept in the guest room for the first time. He claimed I was in a mood, and he didn't want to deal with it. But I think we both knew something had fundamentally shifted between us. The guest room became his permanent residence after that. When friends asked why, Bobby would joke that I snored too loudly. "Happy wife, happy life," he'd say with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes a man needs his beauty sleep. But I knew it wasn't about snoring. It was about Bobby no longer being able to pretend he wanted to be close to me when his heart was clearly somewhere else. I stopped doing the little things that had defined our relationship for decades. No more bringing him lemonade in the garage. No more ironing his shirts the way he liked. No more asking about his day or sharing stories about mine. Carol noticed when she came by one afternoon in October. "Maggie, honey, you seem different lately, quieter." "I'm fine, Carol, just busy with my own things." "Is everything okay with you and Bobby?" I looked at my friend of 12 years, this woman who'd witnessed my humiliation at her barbecue and felt too tired to pretend anymore. "Bobby and I are figuring some things out," I said carefully. Carol's face softened with understanding. "If you need to talk, I'm here." But talking felt pointless. What was there to say? That my husband of 43 years had emotionally abandoned our marriage for someone I'd never met? That I was living with a stranger who looked like the man I'd loved for most of my adult life? Instead, I started volunteering more at the library, joining the garden club, taking long walks by myself. I was building a life that didn't revolve around Bobby's moods or schedule or mysterious absences. People began commenting on how independent I'd become, how strong I seemed. They didn't realize that independence and strength were just survival skills, ways of protecting what was left of myself when everything familiar had been stripped away. The strangest part was that Bobby seemed relieved by my withdrawal. No more questions about his calls or trips. No more expectations of intimacy or conversation. I'd essentially given him permission to live his double life without interference. But here's what nobody understood, including Bobby. Pulling back didn't mean giving up. It meant conserving energy for whatever came next. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and confusion and loneliness, I was still Margaret Chen, still a woman who deserved better than being a placeholder in her own marriage. I just didn't know yet what better was going to look like. Bobby's heart attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning in February. One moment, he was standing at the kitchen counter, eating toast and scrolling through his phone with that secretive smile I'd grown to dread. The next moment, he was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face gray as winter sky. "Bobby!" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside him. His eyes were wide with terror and confusion, like he couldn't understand what was happening to his body. "Stay with me, Bobby. Stay with me." I called 911 while trying to remember CPR from a class I'd taken 20 years ago, but Bobby's lips were already turning blue, and by the time the paramedics arrived, that broken watch on his wrist had outlived its owner. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and sympathy casseroles. People lined up to tell me what a wonderful man Bobby had been, how lucky I was to have had such a devoted husband, how their love story was what everyone aspired to. 43 years, said Mrs. Patterson from church, squeezing my hands. What a blessing to have loved someone so deeply for so long. I nodded and smiled and accepted their condolences, but inside I felt like a fraud. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure what I was mourning anymore. Was I grieving the Bobby I'd fallen in love with at 19? The Bobby who'd built me a porch swing and called me his best girl? Or was I mourning the stranger who'd spent the last 3 years of his life checking his phone every 5 minutes and sleeping in the guest room? The house felt enormous and suffocating at the same time after everyone left. I wandered from room to room like a ghost, touching Bobby's things, but feeling no connection to them. His coffee mug still sat in the sink, lipstick stained from that last morning. His reading glasses were folded on the side table next to his recliner. That broken watch sat on the nightstand where the paramedics had placed it after checking for a pulse that would never come back. I couldn't bring myself to move any of it, Emma stayed for a week, sleeping in her old bedroom and trying to take care of me the way I'd once taken care of her. She made me soup I couldn't taste and tea that sat cold in my hands. She talked about funeral arrangements and insurance paperwork and all the practical things that needed handling when someone dies. "Mom, you need to eat something," she'd say, sitting beside me on the couch where I'd taken to spending entire days in my bathrobe. "I'm not hungry, sweetheart." "You haven't eaten more than a few bites in 3 days. Dad wouldn't want you to waste away." But what did Bobby want? I realized I had no idea anymore. For 3 years, maybe longer, I'd been living with someone whose real desires and feelings were a complete mystery to me. The nights were the worst. I'd lie in our bed, my bed now, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. The silence was different than it had been when Bobby was alive but absent. This was final silence, permanent quiet. I started having conversations with him in my head. "Why did you leave me like this, Bobby? Why didn't you just tell me you didn't want to be married anymore?" But even my imaginary Bobby couldn't give me answers that made sense. The sympathy cards piled up on the kitchen table. "Thinking of you during this difficult time. May happy memories comfort you." He was one of the good ones. One of the good ones. I read that phrase over and over until the words lost all meaning. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was still wearing the same navy blue sweater I'd put on the morning Bobby died. I hadn't showered in 4 days. I'd stopped answering the phone when friends called to check on me. The refrigerator was full of food I couldn't bring myself to eat. That's when I found myself standing in Bobby's closet at 2 in the morning, holding his favorite flannel shirt against my face and sobbing until my chest ached. The shirt smelled like his aftershave, and the garage, and something else I couldn't identify. Maybe loneliness, maybe lies. "I don't even know who you were," I whispered into the fabric. "How can I miss someone I didn't even know?" But that was the cruelest part of grief I was learning. You don't just mourn the person who died. You mourn all the versions of them you thought you knew, all the futures you'd planned together, all the questions that would never get answered. I was mourning Bobby the devoted husband, even though that Bobby might have been an illusion for years. I was mourning the life I thought we'd built together, even though I was beginning to suspect it had been built on quicksand. Most of all, I was mourning myself. Margaret Chen, beloved wife. Margaret Chen, half of a perfect partnership. Without Bobby, without that identity, I didn't know who I was supposed to be. The broken watch sat on the nightstand, hands frozen at 3:17, keeping perfect time in a world that had stopped making sense. 2 months after the funeral, I finally forced myself to start going through Bobby's things. Emma had been gently suggesting it for weeks, and I knew she was right. Keeping his closet exactly as he'd left it wasn't helping anyone heal. I started small. A drawer of old receipts and business cards, another drawer full of batteries and screwdrivers and electrical tape. Things that had no emotional weight, no memories attached. But that broken watch kept drawing my attention. It sat on the nightstand like an accusation, its silver face catching the afternoon light streaming through our bedroom window. For 43 years, Bobby had worn it religiously, checking it constantly, despite the fact that it never moved from 3:17. "Some things are perfect just the way they are, broken or not," he used to say. Looking at it now, I felt angry. How dare he use that watch as a metaphor for our marriage when he was planning to leave me? How dare he make me believe that broken could still be beautiful when he was already halfway out the door? I picked it up, surprised by how heavy it felt in my palm. The metal was warm from the sunlight, and I could see tiny scratches on the crystal where Bobby's sleeve had rubbed against it thousands of times over the decades. "You know what?" I said out loud to the empty room. "Let's see what's so perfect about being broken." I grabbed my purse and drove to Hoffman's Jewelry, a little shop downtown where Bobby and I had bought my engagement ring 44 years ago. The same elderly man was behind the counter, though his hair had gone completely white and his hands shook slightly as he examined the watch through his jeweler's loupe. "Mrs. Chen," Mr. Hoffman said kindly. "I was so sorry to hear about Bobby. He was a good man." "Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I was wondering if you could take a look at his watch. It stopped working decades ago, but he wore it anyway. I thought maybe I should finally have it fixed, or at least find out what's wrong with it. Mr. Hoffman nodded and took the watch to his workbench under a bright lamp. He worked quietly for several minutes, using tiny tools to carefully pry open the back panel. "Well, this is unusual," he murmured, squinting at the watch's interior. "What is it?" "There's something in here that doesn't belong. A tiny memory card wedged between the gears. That's why it stopped working. Someone put this in here deliberately." My heart started pounding. "A memory card?" Mr. Hoffman held up something smaller than my fingernail. "A micro SD card, the kind they use in phones and cameras. It's been keeping the mechanism from moving all these years." I stared at the tiny chip, my hands beginning to tremble. Could you remove it?" "Of course. But Mrs. Chen, are you sure you want this? It was obviously placed there intentionally. Someone wanted it hidden. Hidden. Bobby had been hiding something in that watch for who knows how long, checking it constantly not to see the time, but to make sure his secret was still safe. Please take it out." Mr. Hoffman carefully extracted the memory card with a pair of tweezers and handed it to me. It was so small, I was afraid I'd drop it, but I held it tight in my closed fist all the way home. Back in my kitchen, I sat staring at my laptop for 20 minutes before I finally worked up the courage to insert the card into the side slot. A single file appeared on the screen. "For Sarah. Watch this when I'm ready. MP4. Sarah." The name from that text message 3 years ago. The name I'd tried so hard to forget. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a long moment. Part of me wanted to delete the file without watching it. Some secrets were meant to stay buried with the dead, but I'd spent 3 years feeling crazy, questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was being paranoid or oversensitive. If Bobby had hidden something this deliberately, this carefully, then I deserved to know what it was. I double-clicked the file. Bobby's face filled the screen, sitting in his truck outside our house. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 3 months before his heart attack. He looked directly into the camera, and his expression was softer than I'd seen it in years. Not the tired, irritated face he'd been showing me lately, but the warm, charming Bobby I'd fallen in love with. Except he wasn't talking to me. "Hey, beautiful," he said to the camera, and my stomach dropped. "I know I've been saying I'll leave Maggie for 2 years now, and I know you're getting tired of waiting, but I wanted you to see my face when I tell you this, so you know I mean it." He paused, running his hand through his gray hair. "I'm finally ready, Sarah. I'm going to tell her after Emma's wedding next month. 43 years is long enough to spend with someone you've outgrown. She's been a good wife, but she's not you. She never was." The video continued for another 3 minutes, with Bobby explaining his plan to divorce me, sell the house, and start fresh with Sarah somewhere in Arizona. He talked about me like I was a business arrangement he was tired of maintaining, a responsibility he was finally ready to shed. When the video ended, I sat in complete silence for a long time, staring at the frozen image of my husband's face. He looked so happy, so relieved, so excited about a future that didn't include me. Emma's wedding had been scheduled for the week after Bobby's heart attack. He'd died exactly 1 week before he planned to destroy our marriage. I closed the laptop and looked around our kitchen, my kitchen now, with completely different eyes. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. The man I'd mourned, the marriage I'd believed in, the love story everyone envied, none of it had been real. At least, not for Bobby. And for the first time since his funeral, I wasn't sure if I was heartbroken or relieved. I watched that video 7 times over the next 3 days. Each viewing revealed new details that cut deeper into what I'd believed about my life. The way Bobby's eyes lit up when he said Sarah's name. How his voice got softer, more tender than it had been with me in years. The casual cruelty of calling me someone he'd outgrown, like I was a childhood hobby he'd lost interest in. But it was the timeline that really shattered me. 2 years. He'd been promising to leave me for 2 full years while kissing my forehead every morning and calling me his best girl. 2 years of another day with my best girl, while planning his escape to someone who made him smile the way I used to. Emma's wedding had been scheduled for March 15th. Bobby died on March 8th. 7 days. I was 7 days away from having my entire world exploded in front of family and friends, probably at the reception where Bobby would have pulled me aside to tell me our marriage was over. The cruelest irony was that his heart attack had saved me from that humiliation. Death had been kinder to me than my husband would have been. On the 4th day, something shifted inside me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at that tiny memory card, when I realized I wasn't crying anymore. The numbness that had wrapped around me since Bobby's funeral was lifting, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. For 3 years, I'd been questioning my own sanity. Was I being paranoid about the phone calls? Was I imagining the emotional distance? Was I too needy, too clingy, too suspicious? Bobby had made me doubt my own perceptions so completely that I'd started apologizing for feeling neglected in my own marriage. But I hadn't been crazy. Every instinct, every moment of unease, every time my stomach twisted when I saw him smile at his phone, I'd been right. My husband had been living a double life, and I'd been the only one who didn't know it. "You weren't losing your mind, Maggie," I said out loud to the empty kitchen. "You were married to a liar." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I took a shower, washed my hair, and put on real clothes instead of the bathrobe that had become my uniform. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. For the first time since the funeral. I was 62 years old, with silver threading through my brown hair and lines around my eyes that hadn't been there when Bobby and I met. But I wasn't dead. I wasn't used up. I wasn't the pathetic, clingy wife Bobby had described in that video. I was a woman who'd been faithful for 43 years to someone who'd been planning his exit strategy. I was a woman who'd supported her husband's dreams while letting her own teaching career die. I was a woman who'd made a home, raised a daughter, and built a life around someone who saw her as a burden to be shed. But I was also a woman who was still here, still breathing, still capable of more than mourning a marriage that had been dying long before Bobby's heart stopped beating. That evening, I called Emma for the first time since she'd gone back to her own life 2 weeks earlier. "Mom, are you okay? You sound different." I'm starting to be okay, sweetheart. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. What is it?" "In the last few years, did your father ever seem distant to you? Like he was going through the motions, but his heart wasn't really in it?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Mom, why are you asking me this?" "Because I need to know if I was the only one who noticed." Another pause. "No, Mom, you weren't the only one. Dad seemed, I don't know how to describe it, like he was waiting for something or someone. I kept thinking maybe he was just having a midlife crisis, even though he was way past midlife." "Did you ever think about saying something to me?" "I wanted to, but you seemed so happy, and I didn't want to plant seeds of doubt if I was wrong. I kept hoping it was just a phase." After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the photos on the mantel. Bobby and me on our wedding day, young and glowing with hope. Bobby holding baby Emma, his face soft with wonder. Family vacations, anniversaries, Christmas mornings. 43 years of memories that now felt like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was part of. But here's what Bobby hadn't counted on. I was stronger than he'd given me credit for. Stronger than I'd given myself credit for. He'd seen someone he could deceive and discard. But betrayal, I was learning, could be a strange kind of gift. It burned away illusions and left only truth. And the truth was that I was still here, still Margaret Chen, still a woman with value that didn't depend on whether Bobby could see it. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe again. The broken watch was finally working, just not the way Bobby had intended. The morning after my conversation with Emma, I woke up with a strange sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Not revenge, that would come later, and it wouldn't look the way people might expect. This was something quieter, more methodical. I was going to find out exactly who my husband had been when he wasn't being my husband. I started with the obvious. Social media. I'd never been much for Facebook or Instagram, but I created accounts using my maiden name, Margaret Sullivan. It felt like putting on clothes that actually fit after years of wearing the wrong size. Finding Sarah Mitchell was easier than I'd expected. Bobby had mentioned Arizona in the video, and there she was, a 58-year-old artist living in Tucson. Her profile was public, full of photos of desert landscapes and pottery she'd made. She was attractive in an earthy, bohemian way that was nothing like me. Long silver hair, turquoise jewelry, flowing skirts. Everything about her screamed free spirit, while I'd spent decades being Bobby's anchor. I scrolled through 3 years of her posts, looking for traces of my husband. There weren't any photos of them together. Bobby had been careful about that. But the timeline told its own story. Posts about finally feeling understood that coincided with when Bobby had started acting strange. Photos from restaurants in Phoenix, taken during weekends when Bobby was supposedly helping his brother David. David. I called him that afternoon, something I hadn't done since Bobby's funeral. Maggie. David's voice was warm but surprised. How are you holding up, sweetheart? I'm doing better, David. I was wondering, did Bobby help you with any relationship advice lately? With someone named Sarah? The silence on the other end was so long I thought the call had dropped. David? Maggie, I think we need to talk. So you knew. Another pause. I knew Bobby was confused about some things toward the end, but I didn't know any details, and I certainly never asked him to help me with any woman named Sarah. Confused. Such a gentle word for planning to abandon your wife of 43 years. How long did you know? About a year. Maybe more. He'd call me sometimes, talking about how he felt trapped, like he'd married too young and never got to experience real love. I told him he was being an idiot, that grass is greener thinking. I thought it would pass. But it didn't pass. No, Maggie, it didn't. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I kept thinking he'd come to his senses. After I hung up with David, I spent the evening planning, not plotting, planning. There's a difference. Plotting is emotional, reactionary. Planning is strategic, methodical. I made lists, Bobby's financial accounts that I'd need to access, insurance policies to review, legal documents to locate. I'd handled our finances for decades, but I wanted to understand exactly what I was entitled to, what Bobby might have already moved or changed. The next morning, I made an appointment with Patricia Williams, the lawyer who'd handled our wills years ago. I didn't tell her why I was coming, just that I needed to review my legal situation as a widow. Patricia's office felt safe, professional, removed from the emotional chaos of the past few months. Maggie, I'm so sorry for your loss, she said, settling behind her desk with a thick file. Bobby was a good man. Thank you, Patricia. I need to understand my financial position now that he's gone. And I need to know about something else. I pulled out the tiny memory card. If I discovered that Bobby was having an affair before he died, would that affect anything legally? Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, since Bobby is deceased, it wouldn't affect your inheritance rights. You're still entitled to everything as his surviving spouse. But Maggie, why are you asking? Did you find something? I found everything. Over the next hour, I told Patricia about the video, about Sarah, about the 2 years of lies. She listened without judgment, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. What do you want to do with this information? She finally asked. I want to understand all my options. Financial, legal, personal. I want to know exactly where I stand. Maggie, you're in a stronger position than you might think. The house is paid off, both your names are on all accounts, and Bobby's pension continues to you. The affair, while painful, doesn't change your legal rights. But it had changed something else. It had changed how I saw myself. For 43 years, I'd been Bobby Chen's wife. Now I was discovering what it meant to be Margaret again. Margaret who made her own decisions. Margaret who didn't need anyone's permission to live her life. The setup wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation, and it was only the beginning. The shift started small, in ways that might have seemed insignificant to anyone watching from the outside. But I could feel it happening, like ice beginning to crack under the weight of spring. Carol Martinez was the first to notice. She came by on a Thursday afternoon with a casserole, the third one since Bobby's funeral, and found me in the backyard, wearing gardening gloves and actually working in the flower beds for the first time in months. "Maggie? You're gardening?" "I'm cleaning out the dead growth," I said, pulling up withered stems with more force than strictly necessary. "Making room for new things to grow." Carol sat on the porch steps, watching me work. "You seem different today. Stronger, somehow." "I'm finding my footing." "Are you seeing someone? A counselor, I mean?" I paused, considering how to answer. "I'm seeing things more clearly, yes." What I didn't tell Carol was that I'd spent the morning on the phone with Bobby's cell phone carrier, using my access as the account holder to download 3 years of detailed phone records. Every call, every text, every data usage spike. The paper trail of his deception was laid out in neat columns of dates and times and phone numbers. The most frequent number belonged to Sarah Mitchell. They'd talked almost daily for 2.5 years, sometimes for hours at a time. The longest calls happened on weekends when Bobby claimed to be helping friends with electrical work. I also didn't mention that I'd driven past Tom Williams' house that morning, the same Tom who'd gossiped about my marriage at Carol's barbecue. His wife Helen was watering flowers in her front yard when I pulled up. "Maggie, how wonderful to see you out and about. You look refreshed." "I feel refreshed, Helen. I was wondering if I could ask you something." "Of course, dear." At Carol's barbecue last summer, Tom mentioned that he'd seen Bobby texting someone. I'm trying to understand some things about the last few years of his life. Did Tom ever say anything else about that? Helen's face flushed red. "Oh, Maggie, I don't think Tom meant anything by it. You know how men talk." "Helen, I'm not angry. I just need to know what people saw that I was too close to see." She glanced toward her house, making sure Tom wasn't listening from inside. "He said Bobby was always on his phone when they'd run into each other at the hardware store, smiling at it like a teenager. And once, Tom saw him sitting in his truck outside the coffee shop downtown, talking to someone and laughing. He said he'd never seen Bobby laugh like that, not even with you. Not even with me." The words stung, but they also clarified something I'd been trying to understand. Bobby hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been happier with Sarah than he'd ever been with me, at least in those final years. That afternoon, Emma called to check on me, something she'd been doing weekly since returning to her life in Denver. "Mom, you sound, I don't know, different. Better, maybe?" "I'm discovering some things about myself, sweetheart, and about your father." "What kind of things?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm learning that I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that your father was more complicated than either of us realized." "Mom, you're scaring me a little. What's going on?" "Nothing scary, Emma. I'm just finally seeing clearly for the first time in years." The next day, I did something that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. I called the Phoenix area phone number I'd found on Bobby's cell records, the one that appeared most frequently after Sarah's. A man answered. "Valley View Apartments, this is Mike." "Hi, Mike. I'm calling about one of your tenants, Sarah Mitchell. My husband, Bobby Chen, was a friend of hers, and he passed away recently. I was hoping to get in touch with her." "Oh, Bobby, yeah, he was here all the time visiting Sarah. Real nice guy. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." All the time. Bobby had been spending so much time with Sarah that the apartment manager knew him by name. "Could you give me Sarah's apartment number? I'd like to send her a card." "Sure thing. She's in 4B, but she's actually moving out next week. Said she was planning to relocate somewhere closer to, well, I guess that would have been closer to Bobby." Sarah had been planning to move closer to Bobby. They'd been planning a life together, probably in the house Bobby and I had built, with the money from selling our home. But Bobby was dead, and Sarah was moving to be closer to a ghost. That evening, I stood in my living room looking at 43 years of marriage photos, and I realized something profound had happened over the past few weeks. I was no longer mourning Bobby. I was mourning the version of myself who'd believed his lies. And that woman, that trusting, naive, diminished version of Margaret Chen, was finally completely gone. The power hadn't shifted because I'd done anything dramatic or confrontational. It had shifted because I'd stopped pretending I didn't know the truth. And truth, I was discovering, was its own form of strength. I chose a coffee shop called Desert Blooms in downtown Phoenix, a 3-hour drive that gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I wanted to say. Not the angry confrontation that Sarah might expect from a betrayed wife, but something more deliberate, more purposeful. I'd called her the day before, using the number from Bobby's phone records. When she answered, her voice was soft, cautious. "Sarah, this is Margaret Chen, Bobby's wife." The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me everything I needed to know. "Mrs. Chen, I don't know what to say. I think we should meet. I have something that belongs to you." "I don't understand." "Bobby made something for you before he died. A video. I think you should have it." The silence stretched so long, I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, "How did you find it?" "That's a conversation for tomorrow. Desert Blooms Coffee Shop on Central Avenue, 2 o'clock. Do you know it?" "Yes, but Mrs. Chen, I need you to know that I never meant for—" "Tomorrow, Sarah. We'll talk tomorrow." Now, sitting across from the woman my husband had loved more than me, I felt strangely calm. Sarah was exactly what I'd expected from her photos. Flowing auburn hair with silver streaks, turquoise earrings, nervous hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was an anchor. She was also visibly shaking. "Mrs. Chen, thank you for coming all this way, but I have to ask, why are you here? Why aren't you screaming at me or calling me horrible names?" I studied her face, looking for the femme fatale who'd stolen my husband. Instead, I saw a woman who looked as confused and lost as I'd felt for the past 3 years. Because screaming at you won't change anything that's already happened. And because I think we've both been living with lies. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I loved him. I know that probably sounds horrible to you, but I did love Bobby." "I know you did. I could see it in your social media posts, in the way he talked about you in the video he made." "You watched it?" I pulled the tiny memory card from my purse and placed it on the table between us. 7 times. He was planning to leave me after Emma's wedding. He was going to sell our house and start over with you somewhere in Arizona. Sarah stared at the memory card like it might explode. "He said he was ready, that he'd finally found the courage to end his marriage, but then his heart stopped, and all those plans died with him." "Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand something. Bobby told me you two had been living separate lives for years, that you barely spoke, that you slept in different rooms, that you were more like roommates than spouses." The casual cruelty of that lie hit me like a physical blow. "Is that what he told you?" "Yes. He said you were a good person, but that you'd both outgrown the marriage, that it had been over in all but name for a long time." I laughed, surprising us both. "Sarah, 3 days before Bobby died, he kissed my forehead and told me I was his best girl. The morning of his heart attack, we shared coffee and he read me interesting bits from the newspaper. We may not have been passionate anymore, but we weren't roommates. At least, I wasn't." Sarah's face crumpled. "He lied to me too." "He lied to both of us. The difference is I gave him 43 years of my life believing those lies. You only gave him 2. I slid the memory card across the table. "This belongs to you. It's the last thing he made, and it was meant for you. But Sarah, I need you to know something else." She looked up, mascara smudging under her eyes. "Bobby didn't leave me for you. He left me for a fantasy version of himself that could only exist away from his real life. You weren't getting the man you thought you were getting. You were getting someone who was capable of lying to his wife for 2 years while planning to abandon her at their daughter's wedding." Sarah picked up the memory card with trembling fingers. "Why are you giving this to me? Why aren't you destroying it?" "Because you deserve to know who he really was, just like I deserve to know. And because keeping his secrets died with him." I stood to leave, but but Sarah caught my wrist. "Mrs. Chen, what happens now?" I looked down at this woman who'd unknowingly helped my husband betray our marriage, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. "Now you get to decide if you want to love a memory of someone who never really existed, and I get to decide who I want to be without him. I'm so sorry for all of it. I know you are, Sarah, but sorry doesn't give me back the last 3 years of my marriage. It just helps us both move forward." As I walked back to my car, I realized something had fundamentally shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was free. Free from wondering, free from doubting myself, free from carrying the weight of Bobby's deception. The confrontation I dreaded had turned into the liberation I hadn't known I needed. The real justice came 3 weeks after my meeting with Sarah in a way I never could have orchestrated or predicted. It arrived in the form of a phone call from Patricia Williams, my lawyer, on a Tuesday morning while I was having coffee in my sun-filled kitchen, alone, but no longer lonely. "Maggie, I need you to sit down. I've discovered something about Bobby's finances that changes everything." My stomach clenched. "What kind of something?" "Remember how we went through all of Bobby's accounts and found everything in order? Well, I decided to do some additional digging. Maggie, Bobby opened a separate bank account 18 months ago. He'd been moving money into it systematically, small amounts that wouldn't trigger any alerts." The coffee mug felt heavy in my hands. "How much money?" $47,000. But here's the thing. The account was set up as a joint account with Sarah Mitchell. She had full access to it. My breath caught. Bobby hadn't just been planning to leave me emotionally and physically. He'd been financially preparing for it, using our money, money from his pension, money from the business I'd helped him build, to fund his new life with another woman. "Patricia, what does this mean legally?" "It means Bobby was stealing from the marital estate to fund an extramarital relationship. In Arizona, that's considered dissipation of marital assets. If he'd lived and you'd divorced, you would have been entitled to reimbursement plus damages. But he didn't live. No, he didn't. Which is where this gets interesting. Sarah never knew the money was marital property. When Bobby died, the account became part of his estate, which means it reverts to you automatically. She's been unknowingly spending your money." The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Sarah had been living off money that Bobby had stolen from our marriage, money that was rightfully mine all along. Has she spent much of it? About $12,000. She's been using it to pay for the move closer to where Bobby lived, ironically enough. New apartment deposits, moving expenses, even a down payment on a car so she could drive to see him more often. The justice of it was poetic in a way that felt almost biblical. Sarah had been spending my money to facilitate her affair with my husband, completely unaware that every dollar was evidence of his betrayal of both of us. "What do you recommend we do?" "We contact Sarah and explain the situation. She'll need to return the remaining funds, and technically, we could pursue the money she's already spent. But Maggie, here's what I find most interesting. The account has a beneficiary designation." "Who's the beneficiary?" "You are. Even while Bobby was stealing from your marriage to fund his affair, he kept you as the beneficiary on the secret account. Either he couldn't bring himself to completely remove you from his financial life, or he was covering his tracks in case he got caught." "Exactly. This way, if you'd discovered the account before his death, he could have claimed it was a surprise savings account for your retirement." I sat in silence for a long moment, processing the layers of deception. Bobby had stolen our money to fund his escape from our marriage, but had been too cowardly or too calculating to remove my name entirely. Even his betrayal had been incomplete. "Patricia, I want you to contact Sarah and explain the situation, but I don't want to pursue the money she's already spent. Maggie, you're entitled to every penny plus interest and penalties." "I know. But Sarah was as much a victim of Bobby's lies as I was. She thought she was spending money her boyfriend had legitimately saved. She didn't know she was spending stolen money from his wife." "You're being very generous." "I'm being strategic. Sarah lost the man she loved and discovered he was a liar. Making her pay back money she spent in good faith won't change what Bobby did, but letting her keep it while reclaiming the rest sends a message. What message is that? That I'm not the bitter, vindictive ex-wife Bobby probably painted me as in his stories to her. I'm someone who can distinguish between the person who betrayed me and the person who was manipulated by him. The next day, Patricia called Sarah and explained about the account. Sarah's response was immediate and telling. She wanted to return all of it, even the money she'd already spent. She's horrified, Patricia reported. She had no idea the money came from marital assets. She's offering to take out a loan to pay back what she spent. Tell her to keep what she's already used, but to return the rest. And Patricia, tell her why. What should I say? Tell her that Bobby's final gift to both of us was showing us exactly who he really was. And now we both get to decide who we want to be without him. When the remaining $35,000 was deposited back into my account, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not vindication, but clarity. The money wasn't really the justice. The justice was that Bobby's own greed and deception had created a paper trail that revealed the full scope of his betrayal. He'd thought he was so clever, so careful, but his need to control the narrative, even from beyond the grave, had exposed him completely. The final twist wasn't that I'd gotten revenge. It was that Bobby had gotten exactly what every liar fears most: the complete, undeniable truth. The call came on a Sunday morning 6 months after Bobby's funeral, while I was reading in my garden with a cup of coffee that had actually stayed hot because no one had interrupted me to ask where their reading glasses were or whether I'd seen the sports section. "Maggie, it's David." Bobby's older brother sounded nervous, which wasn't like him. David had always been the confident one, the successful businessman who'd never had trouble speaking his mind. "Hi, David. How are you doing?" Well, I'm calling because I think there's something you need to know about Bobby, about the last few years." I set down my book and leaned back in the patio chair Bobby had assembled for me 3 summers ago. "David, if this is about Sarah, I already know." The silence stretched so long I thought the connection had dropped. "You know? I know about the affair. I know about the money he moved to a joint account with her. I know he was planning to leave me after Emma's wedding. I know all of it." "Jesus, Maggie, how long have you known?" "Since I found the video he made for her, hidden in that broken watch he wore every day." Another long pause. How are you handling this?" "I'm handling it, David, better than I thought I would, actually. But why are you calling now? You've known about this for over a year, haven't you?" "Longer than that," he admitted. "Bobby started talking to me about feeling trapped maybe 2 years ago, said he'd married too young, never got to experience real love. I told him he was being an idiot, that he had a good life with you." "But you didn't tell me." "No, I didn't. And I've been eating myself alive with guilt about it ever since the funeral. I keep thinking, if I told you, maybe you could have worked things out, maybe gotten counseling or—" "David, stop." My voice was firmer than I'd intended. "You couldn't have fixed Bobby's problems, and neither could I. He made his choices. But you deserve to know. You deserve the chance to fight for your marriage, or to leave on your own terms." I stood up and walked to the edge of my garden, looking at the roses I'd planted last month. New varieties, colors Bobby had never liked. "David, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "When Bobby talked to you about feeling trapped, did he ever mention what he thought was wrong with me? What I'd done to make him so unhappy?" David was quiet for a moment. "Maggie, it wasn't about you. That's not what I asked. He said you'd gotten comfortable, set in your ways, that you didn't challenge him anymore, didn't make him feel alive the way you used to." The words stung, but not as much as I'd expected. "Did he mention that he'd stopped talking to me about anything meaningful, that he'd been sleeping in the guest room, that he'd check his phone every 5 minutes during dinner?" "No, he made it sound like you two had just drifted apart naturally." "We didn't drift, David. He sailed away and left me anchored to a marriage I didn't know was sinking." "Maggie, I should have told you. I should have warned you somehow." I walked back to my chair and picked up my coffee, surprised to find it was still warm. David, let me ask you something else. Why are you calling me now? 6 months after the funeral, months after I've clearly moved on with my life. Because I can't stand the guilt anymore. Because you were always good to our family, and I failed you when you needed protection. Protection from whom? From Bobby, from his lies. I sat back down, cradling the phone against my shoulder. David, I appreciate that you're feeling guilty. I really do. But I don't need your guilt, and I don't need your protection. Not anymore. What do you need? For the first time in our conversation, I smiled. I need you to stop carrying Bobby's secrets. I need you to stop feeling responsible for choices he made as a grown man. And I need you to understand something important. What's that? I'm not the same woman I was when Bobby was alive. I'm not the trusting, naive person who needed protection from her husband's lies. I've learned to protect myself. You sound different, stronger. I am stronger, strong enough to forgive Bobby for what he did, and strong enough to forgive you for not telling me. But David, I'm also strong enough not to need either of those things from you. I don't understand. I'm saying that your guilt about Bobby's affair isn't my responsibility to resolve. I found my peace with what happened. If you haven't found yours, that's work you need to do for yourself. When we hung up, I realized something profound had just happened. For 43 years, I'd been Margaret Chen, the woman who made everyone else feel better about their choices, their secrets, their failures. The woman who absorbed other people's guilt so they could sleep better at night. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone who could listen to David's confession with compassion, but without taking responsibility for his feelings about it. I'd spent months learning to live without Bobby's love. Now I was learning to live without anyone's need for my forgiveness. And that, I realized, was its own kind of freedom. I'm sitting in my garden now, 9 months after Bobby's death, wearing a sundress I bought last week in a color he never would have liked. Deep purple, bold and unapologetic. The roses I planted after our meeting with Sarah are blooming magnificently, varieties I chose for their resilience rather than their romance. The broken watch sits on the table beside me, but not as a shrine or a symbol of lost love. I had Mr. Hoffman remove the memory card and repair the mechanism. It keeps perfect time now, 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon that belongs entirely to me. Emma visited last weekend and noticed the changes immediately. Not just the redecorated living room where I'd replaced Bobby's recliner with a reading nook, or the fact that I'd converted his workshop into an art studio where I'm learning to paint watercolors. She noticed me. Mom, you seem, I don't know how to describe it. Settled? But not in a sad way. I'm at peace, sweetheart. With Dad being gone? With Dad being exactly who he was. Emma had struggled with learning about Bobby's affair, cycling through anger and disappointment and confusion about how to remember her father. But I'd helped her understand something important. We could acknowledge Bobby's failures without erasing the good parts of who he'd been. He loved you, I told her. Not the way he loved Sarah, and not enough to be honest about it. But he did love you, Emma. That part was real. How can you be so calm about all of this? How are you not angry? I was angry. For about 2 weeks I was furious. But anger is exhausting, and I had a choice to make. I could spend whatever years I have left being bitter about the years I lost, or I could use what I learned to build something better. What did you learn? I'd thought about this question a lot over the past few months. I learned that I'm not responsible for other people's capacity to love me. I learned that faithfulness isn't just about not cheating. It's about being honest about who you are and what you want. And I learned that I spent 43 years making myself smaller so Bobby could feel bigger. The hardest lesson had been realizing that Bobby's betrayal wasn't really about me at all. He'd left me for a fantasy, not just Sarah, but a version of himself that could exist without consequences, without history, without the daily reality of being a flawed human being in a long marriage. Sarah and I had exchanged 2 letters since our coffee shop meeting. She'd moved back to Tucson and was seeing a therapist to process what she'd learned about Bobby and herself. Her last letter included a line that had stuck with me. I think I was in love with the idea of being chosen by someone who was already committed to someone else. It made me feel special in a way that had nothing to do with who I actually am. We'd both been living in Bobby's alternate reality, where love was about feeling alive rather than being honest, where passion mattered more than partnership. His death had forced us both back into the real world, where we had to figure out who we were without him. Carol stopped by yesterday with another casserole. This time not for grief, but because she'd noticed I was busy with my painting classes and book club and volunteer work at the Literacy Center. Maggie, I have to say, you're inspiring. The way you've rebuilt your life after everything, it's remarkable. I didn't rebuild my life, Carol. I built it for the first time. That's the truth I've been sitting with lately. For 43 years, I'd been living Bobby's life, supporting Bobby's dreams, accommodating Bobby's needs. I'd mistaken that for love, for partnership, for what marriage was supposed to be. Now I know the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in someone. I know the difference between compromise and disappearance. I know the difference between choosing to be faithful and having no other options. The broken watch taught me something Bobby never could. Sometimes things stop working for a reason. And sometimes the only way to fix yourself is to stop trying to fix everything else. I checked the time. 2:52 now, 5 minutes that have passed in my own life, on my own terms. The afternoon stretches ahead of me, full of possibilities Bobby will never know about, choices he'll never influence, moments that belong completely to me. Tomorrow I start volunteering at the women's shelter downtown, helping other women who are learning the difference between being alone and being free. Next month, I'm taking a pottery class, something I'd wanted to do for years, but never had time for when I was managing Bobby's schedule, Bobby's needs, Bobby's secrets. I'm 63 years old, and I'm finally meeting myself for the first time. The watch keeps ticking, marking moments in a life that's mine now. Perfect time in an imperfect world that somehow feels exactly right. That broken watch didn't just reveal Bobby's secrets, it revealed my strength. And that, I've realized, was the only thing that needed fixing all along. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. Even when they can't, you remain invaluable.